Pete, do you want to come and bring God's word to us? Sorry, I've not left you loads of time, but good to go.
Bonjour. Je vais prêcher maintenant. Il y a un point de parler. Oh, I'll talk in English now. That was it. That's all my French. That was it. That's everything I've got. Wow. So it was, 2 months ago, I think, 3 months ago, I had an opportunity, just like kind of a free day without really pressured things either side, to go up to Sunderland, which is where I'm from. I know a couple of you are also blessed to be from that part of the world. So I went back up to Sunderland. I don't go back very often now. I used to go back, we have lots of family there, and football team in the Premier League and things to go and do. I haven't gone back in a while, but it was this opportunity where my grand's been getting older and less well, and she's been in a care home for a little bit, and it was a kind of it's a chance now I can go and see her, and I know things have got tougher and it's less pleasant than it used to be. It used to be kind of a slightly confused conversation. It's much worse than that now, and I went back. And it was a funny old experience, because probably every single time, bar a couple, since 1997, when we moved down from Sunderland, I went back with family, or with Hannah, or friends, and we had a group that would come down from university in Dundee to go to see a football match from time to time. And I went on my own, and being on your own gives you time to think of it. And I was there, and I'm always struck by this, but I was so struck by how much this place felt like an echo of home. Like it felt, and I couldn't put it was strange. It is strange when you go back, because if you've been, it's not a remarkable city. It's no different to other northern cities. And it's got coast and it's nice, but there was nothing about it that makes you go, this is. I didn't have a relative really to go and stay with. I didn't have just old friends or an old haunt to go to. But just walking around the streets, there was this funny feeling of home, but it also felt really kind of hollow as well, because if I were to, with the accent I've got now, go up to a person and say, I'm one of you, they'd say, no, you're not. And it would be, I would be, and they'd be right. I have been pretty solidly Southernized. And here I am, and I've had to accept that over the years, that I'm not really a northeasterner anymore, as painful as that feels, I have to say. Okay. And then, and I went to visit her, and it was sad, because it used to be you'd go in and she'd kind of be sitting there and she'd know you were a relative, and she'd be pleased to see you. Not really entirely sure which one you were, but she never really was, to be honest. I used to get called Stephen a lot. And then she'd have a lovely time, but this time it was different, and we got put by the nurses into like a room, just the two of us, and I bought her a birthday card and stuff, and my gran, he really was my one last strong tie to that city. Like, she wasn't there anymore. And I know some of you will have had similar experiences, parents, relatives, where you're just like, that person that you know and love is not there anymore. And like, it was almost comical, but it was tragic. Like, I sat there in this sort of small dining room, and I'd given her a birthday card, and she couldn't really comprehend what that was. So I explained, and I opened it, and I read it to her, and I put it on the table, and she just knocked it over like that. And it was strange, because I was looking at this part of my home that was gone. And I literally sat there, just in floods of tears. And she couldn't understand that I was in tears. And I was like, I'm just glad I was on my own. I was in floods of tears, because it was my gran was gone. My home was gone, really. I could pretend, and you kind of walk along the seafront and go, I walked along the seafront here when I was, 4 or whatever, but it's gone, really. That's not really my home. Anyway, that was really hard, really emotional. I kind of like cried on my way up. I drove to some relatives that lived just outside Newcastle, and we had had a sort of lunch and stuff, and I chatted to them, and they'd had similar experiences, and it was just helpful. And then I was going to meet my aunt, who we're not especially close, but she was going to go and see Gran in the afternoon. And I thought, you know what, I've come all this way, it's a 5-hour journey, I may as well go see her again. So this time we got put in her sort of in her bedroom, had a chat, and she was probably even worse. But this time I was kind of ready, and someone else was there. I was able to rub my eyes or just smile through it and stuff. And it almost ended comically, and it did feel like the end of an age for me, because I thought, you know what, I need to tell her I love her. Even though she's gone, on my way out, I need to tell her I love her. And so through all of the kind of meanness and the confusion and the just not Gran. It wasn't Gran. It wasn't the woman that we used to go around for every single Sunday dinner, and she'd do like 14 veg. Right? Because I think there's a way to show, success and prosperity in the Northeast. Just look how many veg I can open. Right? and that's what we had every Sunday. And it was, and before probably 3 days a week, we'd go before school, so my mum could get to work, and she'd cook us bacon sandwiches, and then we'd all wonder why the life expectancy in the Northeast isn't as high as everywhere else. This is the woman, and she wasn't there anymore. So I sat there and I said, I need to tell her I love her. So as my aunt was leaving, and she's used to it, she goes like every week, I said, Gran, I really love you. And she looked me dead in the eye, and she went, I couldn't care less. That happened, and do you know what I thought? All right, I've done that. This is not home anymore. And it was sort of sad. It was funny because I'd done my grieving in the morning, and in the afternoon it was just like, well, I'll get in the car then. And I came back down, to civilization, and it was but it was, and that was tough. It felt like home was gone. And this is linked. I know this is a little bit of a long preamble. This is linked to something I think I've been really thinking and praying about the passage that we're looking at in Esther today. And I think it boils down to home, and it boils down to home being gone and how that impacts the decision making we have to make as the people of God. We're coming to the climax of the book of Esther. Okay, it's before the middle point actually in Esther, but everything so far has been kind of putting the pieces into place. We have these characters introduced at the start, and the setting being laid out. Okay. And then we have the big problem of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, who, I'll take that one, who's, do you remember from last week, he was an Agagite? Do you remember what you all went to do when you learned he was an Agagite? When Haman the Agagite, and you all went, oh gosh, because they're the worst people, right? And he wants to annihilate all of the Jews. The wise uncle Mordecai gives him the excuse. All the excuse he needs is for Mordecai not to bow to Haman. And Esther, up until this point, the person that the book is named after, has done nothing. If you really think about it, she's a completely passive figure so far. Even the language used around Esther, in chapter 2, it says, Esther was taken to the king's palace. Every single sentence about Esther is, this happened to Esther. Esther doesn't do anything. But she's now faced with a terrible dilemma. And in this, one commenter puts this really well. So, could you just click it for it? Yeah, click it. Yeah. So this is what he says. Initially, a beautiful young woman with a weak character becomes transformed into a person with heroic moral stature and political skill. We're going to see this in the verses we look at today. So what goes on is this almost comical to and fro, which I'm going to just summarise to you. This is chapter 4. So Mordecai, what he's being referred to as Mordecai the Jew. So we remember he is a man of the people of God, of this people that are scattered but different throughout the 127 provinces in Persia. He's one of them, and he is heartbroken. He is in distress because he's heard and he's read the decree the king sent out that the people across the empire can kill the Jews, they can annihilate them, including the women and the children. It's not the last time someone's tried to do that, but it's tragic, appalling, and it's imminent. And he does the classic, it's not just Jewish, but Middle Eastern practice of when you are in distress, you tear your clothes, you put ashes on your head, and you make a physical display of your distress. And he does it as far as he is allowed close to the palace. So they weren't allowed to go in sackcloth and ashes into the palace. So he comes to like the gate, the closest place possible. So he's a public spectacle. Everyone sees him. And Esther's friends and servants go to the palace. Now she's not allowed to go out and see him because she slept with the king. And if you are one of the concubines or wives of the king, you are not allowed anywhere in a public place in case any other man goes anywhere near you. So she was trapped in the palace. He was trapped outside of the palace. So there's this poor guy, this eunuch called Hathach, who plays the role of this almost comical toing and froing, where Esther says something and this guy has to run to Mordecai, and then Mordecai replies and he has to run back. And we don't know how many days would have had to go through for this conversation to take place. But the long and short of it is, Mordecai is mourning. Mourning spreads across the empire as the Jews are in great distress. And in verse 4, Esther hears this and sends him clothes. As if she thought, oh, he's arrived in sackcloth and ashes, he's forgotten how to wear clothes. Have some clothes. And he goes, no, there's a reason why I'm in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther sends Hathach back to find out what's wrong. So he sends Hathach back to her with a copy of the decree. She's the king's wife and she doesn't know this decree has gone out. Now it doesn't immediately impact her because she's hidden the fact she's a Jew. And he says, this is what's going to happen. The people across the empire are commanded to destroy the Jewish people. Can you please use your influence and your close proximity to the king to stop this? Esther sends a message back and says, you don't know what you're asking. You don't know because you're not the king's wife. Because the rules aren't that simple. And we can probably all appreciate that what we understand to be marriage now is not how things were in ancient Persia. But the king had hundreds of wives. And the most precious commodity in the empire was access to the king. So even his wives weren't allowed to go in and talk to him whenever they wanted. In fact, if someone came to talk to the king without permission, without an invitation from the king, instant death, immediate death sentence, okay? Not death row, not telling of, immediate death. So she's saying, if I go in to the throne room and he doesn't want to hear what I've got to say, I'm being killed straight away. And then there is the following verses. So next slide, please. This is what Mordecai says to her in her reply. He says, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. But if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish. The decision she has to make, I think, it seems like a really easy one, looking this far back in history, right? We're thousands of years afterwards, and it's like the choice she has to make: either save her entire people group, or live trapped in a palace as some forgotten wife of a forgotten king. Right? It's quite an easy decision. Come on, Esther. But if we could actually be there and put ourselves in her shoes, all of your hard-fought high position in the palace, all of your comfort, your very life lost. That's a really great decision she has to make. So for her to say, and if I perish, oh well, I just die. That's quite a dramatic and incredible thing for someone to say. It's a decision I think most of us would struggle to make if we're really honest. And this is what I think enables her to do it. I think this decision forces Esther to reckon with the fact that the palace is not really her home. Tim Keller describes home as the place where your needs are met, the place where you're truly accepted. At home, you fit. And in the palace, Esther must have felt, I don't really fit here. Sure, I've got a chest of drawers here and my dresses here and things like that and some servants, but I don't fit here. This palace is not my home. And so she has to make a decision. Because I think all our hard decisions boil down to home, actually. I think that our easy decisions don't. When I try to decide what to have on toast in the morning, home doesn't come reckoning with that. But when I make a tough decision, which of these best protects home? Which of these makes home better? Which of these helps those I love that are at home? Which of these decisions threatens home? I think it all kind of boils down to where we see home. And Esther, I think, here has to reckon with the fact that is Judah home to her? That land that 100 years ago my people got removed from, a place I've never been. Is Persia home? Is this palace where I've got to follow rules and my husband could kill me at a moment? Is that home? I think Esther here has to reckon with where truly home is and do what's best for that. Okay? And I think in these verses we see truly where home is. So I've got 3 points I want to pull out. I think realistically we'll get through 2. So the first point is that this world is not Esther's home. And the second point is that approaching the throne takes us home. And then the final one that I don't think we'll have time for is that home doesn't actually depend on us. So I'll just say it now, hallelujah, it depends on Jesus Christ. So let's go. So this world is not Esther's home. You see, what happened 100 years before was the Jews were removed from their promised land. They were removed from their temple. They were removed from everywhere they considered home, and they were put into a foreign place, foreign empire. And yet this was like repeatedly promised by God. He says, if you keep on transgressing, if you keep on making mistakes and walking away from me, I'm going to remove you from there, and it's actually going to be for my glory. I want to read you some verses from Ezekiel. She just stumbled upon them this morning. God said this, therefore says the Lord, I will gather you from the peoples, so my people, I will gather you from other peoples, and I will assemble you out of other countries where you have been scattered, and I will give you the land of Israel. I'm going to give you all of this back. Okay? And when they come here, they will remove all from it, all of the detestable things, all of the abominations, and here's what I'm going to do, because it's going to be better than it was before. I am going to give you one heart and a new spirit, and I'm going to put within them, that's what I'm going to put within them, and I'm going to remove a heart of stone from their flesh, and I am going to give them a heart of flesh. This all fits into the plan that God has for his people. So let's talk a little bit about home, just coming off that, because I think this dilemma that Esther faces, it's so similar to what we face day in, day out. Okay, does anyone ever feel like things aren't quite right? They're just not quite comfortable with certain areas of life. Has anyone ever felt like that? Like you're just kind of, I don't completely fit here. This is not quite home. Let's go with that, okay? That this world is not our home. Can you all just repeat that to me? This world is not my home. This world is not my home. Hallelujah. This world is not my home. There's this woman called Eva Hoffman, who's an intellectual. She's a Polish Jew, and when she was very young, her family had to flee from Poland because the conditions under the Nazis were becoming less and less tolerable. So they never made it to a concentration camp. They escaped Poland before that. So this is a woman who knows what it is to be displaced and to feel like home is denied of her. I found this such really helpful. She says, since Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, is there anyone who does not feel like an exile? Those of us who've been estranged literally from our physical home get a deep nostalgia for it and say, oh, if only I could get back to it. Then the emptiness I have been feeling would be healed. She goes on to say that if ever we do get back to it, we're rarely satisfied. The human condition is that we are rejected from our authentic self. An ideal sense of belonging eludes us. So what she's saying there, just to give you a bit of a Bible overview, is we were made for something. What we were made for is closeness to God, like relationship with God. We are made to walk with Him. We're made to walk with Him like in the cool of the day. We're made to walk with God casually and yet reverently. We're made to walk with God just for pleasure. Like, God, I just want to spend time with you. This is lovely. Me and you, let's spend time together with nothing in between. That's what we're made for. And the sin in the garden and the sin in our lives that's torn us from God. And so we've been separated from God. And the whole story of the Bible is God assembling, bringing a people back to Himself. So of course we feel like things aren't quite right. And that ache we have inside of us to get back to our home, get back to that place where we consider home, it's a mirage. It's a thing that we go, oh, if I get back to Sunderland, right, where like I can, on a sort of autumn evening, the fog rolls in and you can hear the foghorn, and just before school I'll go around for Brown's bacon sandwiches. Like, I'll just get back to that. And it's hollow, because when you get there, it's just not real. It's not there, and that sense of emptiness or that ache is not fulfilled. Just for Eva Hoffman there, she was torn away from Poland, from the home she remembers. And I'm certain that this quote was inspired by going back later on and going, this was meant to fill the hole, and it didn't. Because the only thing that can fill the hole is home. And the reality of what the Bible teaches us, and the reality of my experience, is that home is a person. Yes. Home is not a place. That sounds really strange, doesn't it? But like, when I first met Jesus, met Jesus, like, that was home. I was like, this is where I want to stay. And like, this is like everything we do. Like, people who don't know Him, come in, please, come in, come meet Him, come home, right? And so that's when someone dies, and we're sad, we go, this person's gone home to be with the Lord. Right? One of my favourite verses is from Psalm 73. And I think verse 15, I'm not sure, but Psalm 73, where David writes, or someone writes, like, who have I got in heaven but you? I don't even want heaven if you're not there, God. Heaven's not my home if you're not there. You are there, but heaven's not my home if you're not there. You're my home. And earth has got nothing I desire beside you. Like, I love my house. It's on the moor, it's lovely, it's got a nice comfy bed in it, it's got my stuff in it. But it's not really my home. Yeah, it's nice, it's fine. I'll hold on to it till the next person buys it, fine. I want to be with Jesus, that's my home. Earth has got nothing I desire besides Jesus. So, I'm not sure, I was going to say this. Let's move on from my notes. So, in the book of Daniel, there's this really curious bit in chapter 9, where it says, as they're in exile, they're in Babylon and then return to Persia, where God says, you've been promised exile's going to last 70 years. Fine, but actually it's going to be a bit longer than that. It's going to be about, there's an awful lot of sevens in this passage, it's going to be 490 years. Which is curious to us, because after 70 years, Cyrus does say, right, Jews, you can go home. So how is it that people have been in exile then for 490 years? Well, it doesn't take a great historian to see roughly what year was it when, roughly what was happening in the world 490 years after this. Well, 490 years after this, after that prophecy, like a baby was born in a manger. And Jesus lived a perfect life, and Jesus died the death we deserve, and Jesus was raised to new life that we might live it with Him. Home came to earth at that point. See, Esther has to realise, and in the palace, where she's under threat constantly, and she's got all of the jewels and the pleasures this world could offer her, this is not home. So actually, if the king kills me when I go in, if I perish because I'm going home. Hallelujah. And if the Lord uses me to deliver the Jews, hallelujah. But regardless, this world is not my home. These pleasures are not my home. God is my home. That's what Esther has to realise. And I think without this decision, it's shaking her into that. She probably would never have realised She goes from being completely passive, and then if you read in the next couple of chapters, to being incredibly skillful, active, dedicated, and wise. So she's got this in her, but this shapes her into realizing this palace is not my home. Walking with the Lord, that's my home. Another person who, in a almost similar dilemma to Esther, that like one of my absolute heroes of history is William Wilberforce, because I feel he was placed in a similar, slightly less dramatic, but similarly awful position. So he, like Esther, had a vaulted high position, it looks like. So there he is, looking much like every single other politician of the age, right? He was a successful politician. He was very good friends with the future Prime Minister of the country. And he looked about himself, and in his devotion to Jesus, he is appalled by what he sees. The transatlantic slave trade is in full swing, and the way his fellow human beings, fellow image bearers, were being treated was just repugnant. And they were saying, I have got a choice. I either ignore it, and it will not dent my political career one bit. No one would criticise him at the time. He would be able to go on, be successful, maybe be Prime Minister himself. He certainly had the skills. I could go on and do that. All the comforts, everything I've worked so hard for. Or I could risk my career, my marriage, my health, my life on saving some people who I don't even know. Sure enough, he spent his life. He threw his career under the bus. And if you've seen the film Amazing Grace, there's this beautiful bit at the end where the old, ill Wilberforce is kind of slumped in the House of Commons, smiling to himself as they signed the Abolition of the Slave Trade Act. But he was faced with that same dilemma Esther is faced, and he makes the decision because this world is not his home. The House of Commons was not his home. In fact, he used the fact that he was in that place of power to do something for the sake of his true home, heaven. This is a quote that he said, life as we know it, with all its ups and downs, will soon be over. We will all give an accounting to God of how we have lived. Do you get that? Like, let's live like that, shall we? Like, where every day, rather than be, how will I make this day as successful, as pleasurable, as profitable as possible for this world? How about let's live like that, where we go, if I get to heaven and God goes, can we just talk about today? I want to be able to go, yeah, because I've done some great stuff for you, Jesus. I want to tell you all about that. Can we live like that? Right, I'm going to skim over a couple of stuff. If you want to read about this world not being your home, please read the book of 1 Peter. It's all about that. He writes to these churches who are facing persecution, and he says, hey, you are elect exiles. You are special, you are chosen, you are the sons and daughters of the living God. You are going to do wonderful things, but you're also exiles. You are also beaten, rejected, painful. This world is not your home. And he tells them again and again how they ought to live it. He says, live as foreigners and exiles. You go on holiday and you watch the customs of the locals and you go, I'm not doing that. You know, like, silly example, when we were in Italy, Italy is the place where all the coffee is named after, right? It's all espresso and cappuccino, right? Me and Hannah, we could not find a good cup of coffee in Italy. They were like, would you like an espresso? And we were like, no, I want a cup of coffee. Do you want a cappuccino? No, not a minute, I want a cup of coffee. And there was a nice waiter who went, oh, I see you want an American coffee. And we went, that might, okay, fine. And so he brought us a glass of warm water and an espresso. And we were like, come on, right? So we lived as foreigners for the week we were there, but we lived as foreigners, desperately trying to get a decent cup of coffee, and the closest we got was with UHT milk, but like, we lived as foreigners. You can look at the customs and the behaviour of the people in this world, but recognise this world is not your home. I think Peter said something along those lines. He didn't talk about coffee, but that was the reality. One translation puts it nicely: live as temporary residents here on earth. Live as temporary residents here on earth. It's how Paul can say, with all sincerity, this is in Philippians 1, he basically goes, I can't decide if I want to live or die. I mean, it makes sense to me to live a bit longer because I'm knocking it out of the park for Jesus. You know, I'm planting churches, seeing souls saved, baptising people, kicking out the super apostles. I'm doing it. I'm giving the devil a bloody nose every time I get up. So it makes sense to me to live, but I would love to go and be with God. Because do you know what? To live is Christ, and to die is gain. Because to die means to go home. You know? To die is to go home. I think they're some of the most freeing words imaginable. And it does bring me to a second point that I'm going to just say really, really quickly. Let's live for home. The second point here is, just go back to the 3 points, please, Rick. Approaching the throne takes us home. Let's just look at what Esther does, actually. She goes, I'm going to go. I'm going to go because I have been placed in this position for such a time as this. I'm going to go into the throne room and go and see the king. And if I am worthy, I will not be killed. But before that, she says, I'm going to go into a different throne room and I'm going to go and see the King of Kings, who I know I'm going to be found worthy of, not because of my own worth, but because of his. Now you might say, yeah, Pete put in a lot of extra words there, but this is the truth of the Bible. She says, go and gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night and day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. So we're going to spend 3 days going into the throne room, going to see the king, who she knows is not going to reject her, before she goes into the piddly throne room of Persia to go see a king that may well reject and kill her. So listen, when we approach the throne of grace, that is us approaching home. And I want to, if you don't know this truth, I want you to know this today. That, like I said before, you may be a fool. I quote this a lot because it makes me smile, but Paul writes in 2 Corinthians, not many of you are wise. Not many of you are successful. Not many of you are all that great. But you know what? That's okay, because he is wise. He is successful. He is great. He lived a perfect life. So go and approach his throne room. And when Jesus describes this, going and approaching the throne of the King of Kings, the Ancient of Days, doesn't talk about going into the temple or dressing in gold and going into the holiest of holies. You know how he describes it? He goes, when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who hears in secret. Isn't that incredible? That when we humbly sneak off, right, no one needs to know, because I'm going to have 5 minutes with Jesus right now. Right? And if someone calls, I'm busy. Okay? And if the toast burns, so be it. I'm going to see Jesus for 5 minutes. I'm just going to tell him how things are. I'm just going to ask him to help me out. I'm just going to tell him he's great. When I go in, you're approaching in the throne room of heaven, the greatest throne, to go see the greatest king. And you know, there's a whole thing of if the king of Persia extends his golden scepter to you, you won't be killed. God doesn't extend to us a golden scepter, right? He extended to us his only son. And then he was killed. And based on that, just sometimes I just think I don't grasp. It wasn't just a man that died. Do you know, it wasn't just, because when you read the Gospels, they're just so factual. There's this is what happened to Jesus. This is the Lord of creation, who when no one is worth dying for my people, apart from me, I'm the only one worthy of laying down my life to ransom my people. Right? The Lord of creation, the God that spoke stars into the sky, it's that God that went, I'm going to open up my arms on the cross and have nails driven through them. I'm going to take the punishment they can't take for themselves. And so as the king of Persia extends his special little scepter to Esther, she is full of confidence because she's already been spending 3 days with the King of Kings, who extended his own son to her. I know this was written before the events of the New Testament, but before the dawn of time, the Son of Man was slain. So Jesus was extended to her. And because she knows that home is not at risk, yeah, sure, her place in Persia is at risk, but that's not home. She's called to do a job for the Lord. And so she does it because home's not at risk. If he kills her, she's still going home. Let me just pray for us as we finish. Dear Lord, I want to ask that as we go from this place, some of us perhaps going to camp for a week, some of us going back to our jobs, some of us going on holiday. Lord, God, as conundrums or dilemmas come our way, Jesus, I pray that you would help us to know in the deepest parts of our heart, Lord, that we do not live home. That the things of this world are not home. And Lord, I ask that we would run to you in all things, in the good and the bad, because that's where we find home. Jesus, I thank you that you came to bring us home. And Jesus, I thank you that one day you're coming on the clouds and you're bringing home smashing down on earth, and there's nothing the devil and his friends can do about it, Lord.